Good morning, New Deal. Welcome. Welcome to Tuesday morning and additional inspiring, thought-provoking conversation. My name is Emily Kane. I am, well, as Kiefer said to me yesterday, once a New Deal leader, always a New Deal leader. So I was going to say I'm a former New Deal leader, but I was a New Deal leader in the original year of the New Deal, in the Wayback Machine in 2011, when I was the Democratic minority leader in the Maine House. I served in the Maine legislature for 10 years between the House and the Senate, and like a lot of you, when I was invited by Debbie and Helen to join the New Deal, I knew I had found my people. People who liked to be smart about politics, but liked to have a real impact when it came to policy. And so I spent the last 6 years as executive director of Emily's List in Washington, D.C., and last year decided to stop doing that and do something different. And Debbie was one of my first calls to say, Emily, do you want to come do some work with us? And so I'm so thrilled to be here, a senior advisor to the New Deal, and to be helping to kick off today and lead our political conversation this morning. Yesterday's speakers and topics really show what a powerful and brilliant network this is. We talked about democracy and elections. We talked about education, climate, and the power of leadership at the state and local level, whether it's in your legislature, down ballot statewide races, in cities, in counties, and in towns. And we all wish, I think I can say this, we all wish it was just as simple as being good leaders with great ideas. Right? Wouldn't it be so nice if it was just like, Mayor Gallego has a super idea, and everyone's like, that sounds great, let's do it. I mean, that's how you pass bills, right, in your legislatures, and that's what your city councils do, right, exactly. But we also know, oh yeah, and don't forget the hard work. We could have that too, and finding common ground. All of those things are why we do this work, but we do them inevitably in a political context, and one where we have to make choices, consider factors, deal with words like climate, and I don't mean like the environment, right? The political climate of all of it. But politics and policy making, they are inextricably linked. And the good news, all of you are very good at both. And this morning, we're going to make that turn to politics, specifically looking here in the state of Arizona and sort of implications for the nation in 2024. We have a very strong panel this morning. I'm going to do brief introductions, and as I do, please come up and join us up here on the stage. Anna Tovar, New Deal leader, Arizona Corporation Commissioner, grew up here and started her commitment to service as a kindergarten teacher, which led her to engagement in the teachers union, which led her to the city council, which led her to be the mayor, which led her to be the state representative, which led her to be the state senator. And in 2020, with the presidential election raging around her, she found her way to be the first Latina elected statewide in Arizona as Corporation Commissioner. Please join me in welcoming New Deal leader Anna Tovar. We are also very lucky to be joined by Joshua Ulibarri. Joshua is a partner at Lake Research Partners. He's a leading researcher who's recognized nationally for his work, particularly understanding the Latino voice in progressive issues and in politics. He has worked on campaigns and ballot initiatives across the country for things like equality, education, responsible gun ownership, and helping to elect historic candidates in big wins in all kinds of districts across the country. Please welcome Joshua. And finally, we are joined by Tony Cani. There he is, there's Tony. Tony is a leading political strategist here in Arizona. In 2020, he served as deputy director of the Biden-Harris campaign right here, helping to win this state for Democrats. And he was also the campaign manager to Mayor Kate Gallego in 2019, so we are excited about that. And he's a regular voice and guest in Arizona politics, Arizona media, Arizona podcasts about what's going on here in the state of Maine. So let's join me in a round of applause for our panel, and we'll have a good conversation. All right, so let's jump right in. And I'm going to ask some questions to the group, to them as individuals, and then I'm going to expect you to have some questions too. And I think there should be no shortage of things to talk about. So hello and welcome to all of you this morning. Thank you so much for doing this. And for each of you, with less than 7 months to go until the general election, that's correct, less than 7 months to go, I think, and here in Arizona, what are the things you wake up thinking about when it comes to 2024 and elections here in the state? Let's start with you, Anna.
I would say the first thing that comes to mind that I wake up worrying about is in regards to voter turnout and the work that we need to do in the next 7 months to make sure we ensure a great turnout with our Latino community, our African American community, and pretty much, our young voters as well too. I have 2 sons that are in their 20s, and right now, I'm encouraging them, but it just feels like they're not necessarily motivated as maybe 2 years ago. So I think we have our work cut out for us in that area.
That's great, and turnout is something I think we all wonder what is going to be the mix, who's going to show up, particularly with so many issues and people on the ballot. Tony, how about you? What do you wake up thinking about?
I'm obsessed with the sort of degree to which the far right controls our state. I don't think that people from around the country fully understand the fact that that guy you see on TV, Charlie Kirk, effectively controls the Republican Party in Arizona. And in fact, they had a takeover that recently happened. The most powerful person in the state Senate, this guy named Jake Hoffman. He made his fortune working for Turning Point. He is a guy that you read in the news because he was suspended from Facebook for running a troll farm out of Arizona. That's all happening here. And you've all seen Carrie Lake and on the news and how she is, and people are just sort of following her lead. And so that's extraordinarily dangerous, but it also has presented a huge opportunity for us, because if you look at like legislative districts, ones that have leaned R historically, but that are close, the candidates that fought against these conspiracy theories aggressively, like Adrian Fontes, they won those districts statewide. And so I think there's a lesson here that we need to be fighting back as hard as we can against this stuff to win.
That's great. Joshua, how about you?
Good morning. Very similar things that I think about. I guess I'll highlight 2 of them. One is turnout and young voter and youth turnout, and the margins by which Democrats win that vote and how important it is. Not just winning it, but we really have to ramp up the vote there. In all of the polling work that I pulled out of the field for the last 2 years, anytime Democrats are ahead, it's almost entirely because of our advantage among women under age 50, and that advantage is 15, 16, 17 points. Everywhere else, it's in this, with men it's upside down, with women over age 50, it's in the single digits. So we are just really reliant on young voters, and I know under 50, I still, who's young voter under 50, but young voter turnout and the margins by which we win that point of the electorate. And I will say this about young voters is they may be progressive, but they are not Democrats. And they won't vote for Republicans for all sorts of reasons: sexism, misogyny, racism, those kinds of things that they feel bad about voting for Republicans. But that's how they punish Republicans. They punish Democrats by staying home. And then the last thing I'll say in terms of what sort of keeps me up or wakes me up is I've got sort of 3 rules about when we win or lose elections, and my second rule is they don't dislike Democrats because we're progressive or liberal. They dislike Democrats, not all of us, but they dislike Democrats because they think we're weak. And to Tony's point about being strong, pushing back, fighting back, drawing strong contrasts is our desire to do that in a meaningful way, in an aggressive and assertive way over the coming 6 months, as you said. Really, really important, because I think that was a big turning point in the 2022 elections, which we'll talk a little bit more about.
I want to stay with you, actually, Josh, because I think you're really, you have the research, right? Other people have the anecdotes, right? You are a pollster. You have the receipts and the research to inform this conversation. So I want to actually start with a question specifically for you. Where Arizona sits issue-wise this year, it feels like it is that intersection of immigration, of the Biden-Trump race, of third parties, right? Certainly being on the ballot here, and now it was already coming, but now it is even more front and center, the issue of abortion, right? So what are lessons you've learned that we can apply this year as we think about whether it's Latino voters or young voters who will be key to winning here? How do all of these factors come to a head, and how do voters think about them as they head into the polls this fall?
Oh man, that's a tough question. There's a lot in there.
There is. Well, I figure, in my experience, pollsters, like, you can't help it. You have to ask about all the things. So I just figure we'll start with you, and then we'll let Tony and Anna come up there.
Yeah, I guess I'll say two things, which is, I guess I'll in terms of the 2022 election, for example, I think in 2022 we had this big fear that it was a referendum on Biden and the Democrats, and we would be in trouble. And then Dobbs happened, right? And then the so-called Biden MAGA speech happened. MAGA's, whatever vowels should be stressed there, which changes it from the referenda into a choice, right? You have a choice there's a choice to be made here. And so what I think about in those issues is just really continue to draw strong contrasts on the pieces that are important. I'll say this about immigration, is back in 2006, in November 2006, after Democrats had taken control of the House, right, we're about to nominate Pelosi to be the first woman speaker in the country. I was on a panel, and I said, somebody had asked about immigration, and this was 18 years ago, so hopefully I'm smarter, better pollster now, but I said, if immigration was so important, why did we just win 45 seats and take control of the House, right? And the Republican pollster looked at me and he said, if we didn't have immigration, you would have won 65 seats in terms of winning control of the House. And so our ability to sort of get right on immigration in a state like Arizona, very important. Our ability to often run counter to what other folks would expect from Democrats, I think pretty important. And then the last thing I'll say and turn it back is, my number one, and I said I have 3 rules, my number one rule about when we win or lose campaigns is if there's not an economic reason to vote for a Democrat, there is no reason to vote for a Democrat. And we've actually been quite lucky that there have not been very many economic elections in the last 20 years, right, because of Dobbs. Well, and I don't mean lucky because of Dobbs, actually. Don't misinterpret we were lucky because of Dobbs, but I mean because we were able to talk about abortion and get off of the economy, et cetera, is we still do not know how to talk about the economy. We're talking way too much right now about jobs when everybody has a job, everybody has 2 jobs if they need it, and not enough about what it means to afford to live in Arizona, afford to live in any state, whether it's energy, housing, et cetera, is the way we talk about the economy is not helpful, and it hasn't been helpful, and we'll see if we can get our legs under us in the next 7 months.
Thank you. And so, Anna, you were on the ballot in 2020 when you won statewide, and in the midst of the campaign that Tony was helping to lead here for Biden-Harris, you are back on the ballot.
No.
Oh, you're not yet. Well, either way, the question stands, which is, what advice do you have, or what lessons have you learned about running statewide in a state like Arizona, and how do you advise people to sort of cut through, right? Because they chose you. Mm-hmm. You ran a great race. I remember that race. I was at Emily's List when you ran that race. It was a big win for everyone, everywhere, but particularly here in Arizona. So from where you sit, how do you think about reaching voters and getting them to choose the right candidates this fall?
It's a great question. As you recall, back in 2020, we were still in the midst of COVID, and so my campaign had to pivot in regards to, not seeing people in person. And for me, that was an absolute priority. I would say in all the campaigns that I ran, being upfront, being accessible to the people, having town halls, being able to just meet, people where they're at, where they're comfortable, getting them to get to know you as a person first, establishing that trust, and then from there, going on with what your priorities are. For our campaign took that pivot, but then from there, we had to change strategies on how we were outreaching to people, so that took place as well too. Our outreach went beyond, of course, Democrats. It was, we targeted very heavily independents, and then we went into Republican territory with women 40 years and over as well too. So those were probably the 2 biggest pickups that we received in regards to me being the highest vote getter. In fact, when President Biden...
Do you like that? She was the highest vote getter. Let's just pause on that. That's pretty awesome. I love that.
In fact, when President Biden was here, he was like, "You actually beat me in 2020, huh?" And I was like, "Well, Mr.
Did you just say
President,"
yes?
I said,
did?
"Mr. President, yes, I did." I said, "But don't worry, we have a plan for you come 7 months so that you can, go ahead and go forward." But I would say we have, a great candidate right now that is running for Senate, Ruben Gallego. He is actually, a
New Deal leader.
New Deal leader.
Also, yeah.
I describe him as a workhorse in comparison to Carrie Lake. Carrie Lake is a show horse. He's the only candidate right now that has gone to all of our indigenous tribes across Arizona. I mean, he's truly seeking, what people are wanting. He's talking about the economy. He's talking about housing. He's hitting the most important topics right now that are top of mind. And he is reaching out to all demographics. He's leaving no one behind. He's coming across as a very strong candidate that is not afraid to battle Carrie Lake. And so I feel, that momentum is going to carry him. Right now, my money is on Ruben Gallego. He'll come across the finish line. Just very positive. I think it'll be somewhere where I was, in the 2020 race. But I mean, we need to have those type of candidates that are out there being aggressive with issues that are very important to Arizonans.
So this theme of fighting for our voters is really emerging here on this panel. And Tony, I want to turn to you, because yesterday we had a great panel on elections, which included Adrian Fontes and, of course, Maricopa County Supervisor Bill Gates was here as well, talking with us, with Democrats and Republicans on stage together. Arizona has been ground zero for these attacks on elections, for these election conspiracy theories, for extreme candidates, as we were just hearing about in Carrie Lake. And others. What is, and you mentioned this in your opening comments, what is the role and impact of these extreme candidates, and how do you see us navigating those? Because I think there are lessons to be learned, because we're all in states now where extreme candidates are breaking through their primaries, right? And so we need to learn lessons from what you're doing here in Arizona, how Carrie Lake lost to your governor now, and talk to us about that and how you're thinking about it this November.
Yeah, I think in Arizona, it's a unique case because the extremism that many of you are experiencing in your headlines and with these elections, as soon as we won in 2020, it started here. It all started here. And then there was that audit that was national news. And that was on the front page of the paper, front page of the internet, every single day during that period. And then the election with Carrie Lake, and all of her conspiracy theories and all this stuff, that was every day. And so voters here in Arizona are aware of the fact that there is this kind of extremism that I hear from candidates around the country. They think like, well, we're gonna have to explain that to people, it's not the case here. And candidates that were successful, they took them on aggressively. And part of the challenge is that the Republican establishment, the kind of Republicans who you can work with on policy, they have invested for years in a lot of these far-right candidates thinking that they could control them once they took office. And obviously that's not the case anymore, right? That's not the case anymore. And so they are kind of in this flux area where they need to decide where it is that they're gonna go. And in 2020 and in 2022, we were able to pull a lot of them over. But it took a ton of work. In 2020, it took, getting the McCains out there, getting everybody out there. There was a huge outreach effort that was happening to Republicans and conservative-leaning independents. In 2022, it was an ongoing fight against, as it's still the case, the 40th to 50th Carrie Lake pivot to being a moderate, right? And
most recently on abortion, I think. We'll get to that next.
Yeah, on abortion. And so, and the challenge is we have to keep it in front of the public and journalists' eyes what their previous positions are. And so, for example, there's that video that of Carrie Lake saying, "Get the hell out." That was a video that's me. I put that out because, and I kept doing it over and over and over and over again until it finally caught on, and then it became like this big part of the national conversation, where it's now a part of her political identity and a part of the identity of the Republicans that control that, like, they're unreasonable. They don't want to work with other people. And Arizona voters, they want results. They're very transactional. And so they want people that'll work with the other side only if that's going to give them results. And so I think that we're able to identify some of these people as not reasonable, and we need to just keep doing it.
I think,
I just say
yeah,
something real
please,
quick about
I was gonna say, jump in.
I think I think the people on the stage, and everybody here, but in Arizona, I would say in particular, have run incredibly sophisticated campaigns over the last 6, 7, 8 years in terms of the way, and all of you have experienced this as well in terms of winning the elections you've won and advice to people on how to win the elections that you've won. But incredibly sophisticated targeting in terms of the way, we just heard a conversation about how we're talking to women over age 40 versus women under age 40, the way Tony was able to advise the national campaign in terms of how the suburban Democrats different than the city Democrats. So incredibly sophisticated. But I wanted to highlight 2 things, I think, which is, because it goes to your freedom poll, right, that your teams talked about yesterday, is the folks who we said, do you feel good about our democracy? Democrats had just held on to the Senate. We had, we barely lost the House. We have the White House. It was Republicans who said they're worried about this democracy more than Democrats in that data. It was Republicans who said I have more doubts about elections than Democrats who have. And so to think that when we talk about democracy, I guess my point is when we think that we're talking about democracy is who do we think we're talking to, right? We're very often, it's the Republicans who are more animated around that conversation than we are around that conversation. And it's because, but we've been able, but the point I'm trying to make is we've been able to have a very, I'm going to say sophisticated, very simple, we are sophisticated thinkers have a very simple conversation in 2022 about Adrian's campaign for Secretary of State and what it meant to protect the vote, about the governor's campaign. I mean, she didn't debate, right? I mean, very sophisticated decision not to debate, and there's reasons why, but have very simple conversations with voters instead of having Carrie Lake be able to sort of dominate headlines. And then the last piece I'll say is, in your data as well, and this is true everywhere, is the difference between Republican Party and MAGA Republicans, and the way voters hear differences between MAGA Republicans in terms of violence and what that means versus just regular Republicans. And in this state, in 2022, they were very, again, sophisticated campaigns, simple language, but able to identify and define these candidates as being MAGA Republicans. And that was just different than the safer Ducey in 2016 in terms of your choice in 2022. Very different choices we've had over the last 4 years because of the way we've been able to define those Republicans. Again, sophisticated thinking, simple conversations, but Tony, fantastic jobs in these campaigns over the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, that's good. We should all clap for Arizona. I think we should just take a minute because we're talking about some really serious stuff here. And I want to talk about, so we mentioned the Freedom Poll, and I think the timing of that poll was very much in line with the 1865 ruling, right? It was sort of, Debbie, was it just after? It was like in the middle of it, right? It was just before. That's what it was. It was just before. And even in that poll, we saw abortion pop, right? Because it was oversample here in Arizona. And now we already had the ballot initiative moving forward for November. Now we have this 1865 law that, absent some other ruling, will go into effect, right, in next week. Is that when it is? So I think there's, as we've seen across the country with these extreme abortion rulings, there's a number of ways people respond. There's outrage, right? There's disbelief. There is that lens of how does this affect me and my family, right? Does it affect me and my family? Then does it affect someone that I might care about? Does it reflect my experience or not, right? As someone who may or may not have needed to seek that kind of reproductive care or worried that they might have to. There's economic things to unpack here. And then there's issues simply of power and control, right? So all pretty simple. No, not simple at all. And we've seen this play out. And I think that, so I think, I'm curious as 3 people who live here in Arizona, who are connected to communities here in Arizona, sort of what has it felt like to be here in the last couple of weeks as this issue has gone from not just a national and Alabama and other people's issue to now front and center here in Arizona. What has it felt like, and where do you think this sort of emotional trajectory goes for the electorate here? Because I think what we've seen in places like Kentucky, where they ran very clear ads about access to abortion and what the difference means when you do and do not have that care, told very personal stories. We see President Biden rolling out an incredible ad on this exact topic. And so I'm really interested in sort of that emotional trajectory and how you think that translates. And I'll put that question to all of you, but Anna, I don't know if you want to start.
Yeah, no, it's a perfect question because, there's been quite a bit of emotion in regards to not only here in Arizona, but of course nationwide. For me, it wasn't a surprise of where this was going to come out. This has been the Republican playbook, 6+ years in the making or more. So, for those, they're elected officials, not a surprise. But for those in the public and community, everyday Arizonans, I've definitely heard the frustration, the anger. I feel it is one of my roles and responsibilities to help them channel that anger into something positive. So it's about just getting ready for this ballot measure and making sure that people are educated and empowered. First of all, hey, make sure you're registered, get everything set so you're ready to go. Encourage your family, encourage others, volunteer. For me, there's nothing more than being able to volunteer, seeing it firsthand, being able to relate with others that are there. So I always encourage people to go to a rally. There'll be one this Wednesday in case there's anyone here at the state capitol, to get involved early and to also donate. These measures, we definitely need a lot of funding behind them in regards to outreaching to, the most vulnerable constituencies. So that, I think, is a top priority. We do hear on the Republican end that, they will try, to put a measure onto the ballot to confuse voters. So I think, we have our work cut out for us because they're, right now thinking of different names that can confuse, voters of thinking they're voting for something, that is for health care, for abortion, and actually would be doing the opposite. So
yeah. Sounds like you're saying if for all those emotional responses, no matter what they are, in some ways, the good news is there is a ballot initiative to point to say you can do something about this right now. You don't even have to wait. You don't even have to organize it. It's already organized. You just have to channel it. So, Tony, look, you want to get in on this conversation, and then we'll go to Joshua.
Something I'm interested in that I haven't seen data or anything on, and I think this is part of what's going on the emotional side, is that for decades, the debate on abortion has largely been theoretical, right? Like, the Republicans will say, no, all those dangerous things that you say are going to happen, they will not happen. No, we will never do this. We will never do that. And then all of a sudden in the news, everybody is seeing these heartbreaking stories. People are experiencing them in their own lives in Arizona, even with the 15-week ban, where we had a family friend who had to leave after 18 weeks, get a hotel room in Nevada, get a babysitter for her kid, go there, stay in a hotel before like a heartbreaking procedure. And that's the reality with the backup law that they're trying to go to. And so I think an important thing is to continue to undermine the credibility of those who are pushing for these reforms. An example in Arizona is the leading group that pushes this. They're called Center for Arizona Policy. And they're running a campaign that's called the It Goes Too Far campaign. At the same time, that's about the initiative, at the same time, when Alabama ruling came out and IVF was banned, they celebrated. And so it's important to keep pointing out, actually, what you want goes way too far. And we have all that information, and they're going to, the other thing I'd say is that because of the emotion and the distrust and everything, I feel like Republicans are looking at two things. They're looking at the ranking of issues, thinking that that has anything to do with vote choice, that abortion is listed 5th or 3rd, even though it's going to be top of mind and you can agitate it up. And I think the other thing is they think that this is a game about numbers. Is it going to be 15 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, whatever? It's not. And I think that that's what we need to keep pushing. And I know I'm giving a long answer, but yesterday In Arizona, the Republican Senate staff accidentally sent their memo, their legal memo, to all of the legislators.
Wait, I have to tell you. So I was in the hallway, and the Washington Post reporter who did our panel yesterday, she was sort of rushing out, and I was like, "Is everything okay?" And she said, "You're not going to believe this, but the Republican staffer just sent out their entire strategy memo to literally everyone, and I have to go. It's breaking news." And she literally ran down the hallway. And so yeah, say more about this, because I didn't get the whole scoop.
Well, I mean, when you click the send to all button,
it goes to everyone.
yeah,
That's amazing.
And then that recall button, it's not going to work.
That's amazing.
It's not going to work. So, and I think the thing about it is drafted as a political document in a way that we may be able to take advantage of, because it explicitly calls for manipulating and lying to voters. Explicitly. Yeah. It says one of the things we can do is we can pretend that this 15-week ban that we're going to put on, this 14-week ban is actually a 15-week ban. And the other thing that it does is it talks about introducing 2 different referrals, with one of them primarily being focused on retaining legislative control over this, because they're very afraid about the constitutional amendment, which is what we're trying to do, taking it out of the hands of legislators. And then the other one, they're fighting over whether it's 8 weeks or whatever, and explicitly they say in there, and I don't think the reporting has covered this right, they say this will dilute the votes, and if any of them win, the one with the majority, gets a majority, their goal in this is that they all fail, because they're protecting the 1864 law. And we need to just be communicating that. I'm a little worried about 1864 becoming like a thing that we're saying, and it's not really explaining the horrors of what this is happening in Arizona. But to my point, I think that we can continue to hammer them on how not credible their arguments are, and we just can't let up, and we have to keep pushing it. And at the same time, we're in a fight right now in Arizona to do something that might not be politically advantageous to Democrats, where we want this 15-week ban to become law again, because we want to save lives over the next couple of months. And so there's this huge, when it comes to policy versus politics, you can't find a Democrat in the legislature who isn't going to be fighting for something that they never would have voted for before. And
I think that's
right
true.
now.
And does everybody get that, right? Where it's like Democrats don't want to have bans on abortion, but they'd rather have the 15-week ban because fewer people will die, right? And more people will be able to get some level of care than stick with the 1864 total ban, right? So there's a dilemma, right? We would talk about this a lot as we think about, how you get ranked on your votes, right? What is your pro-choice position, or pick your issue? This is an area where Democrats who swore they would never vote to have a ban on abortion would need to vote for one because it's better than it would revert back to what it was before, right? And it's a real interesting political challenge that I think everyone is starting to face more and more of. So Josh, you're sitting over there looking very pensive.
I think
we're talking about a lot of things here. Weigh in on.
So I think the old rule about if you're explaining, you're losing, and
Yep.
we just spent 3 minutes explaining their 3 initiatives, and we need to vote for the 15-week ban, even though we're against bans, to take off the 1864 legislation, so people, and I'm not trying to be a jackass, right? So people don't die, 'cause that's literally
this
real.
is right. You're right.
So when I said earlier that we are sophisticated people, this is no mistake what they've done either, right? Because what they've done is does the 15-week or 16-week ban look moderate now compared to the territorial law? And so now these legislators are not so extreme, right? Where this is the middle, right? There's 40 weeks, there's 15 weeks, there's nothing. We're 15 weeks, that's not so bad, right? We know how they explain to voters, right? And so now Hobbs, faced with having to sign a ban, but explain, I'm really pro-choice, but this is more moderate, and now it's sort of really, doesn't neutralize the issue is what they're trying to do. And when I say that we're sophisticated, they're also not stupid people. In 2018, we had a millionaire's tax that we were going to put onto the ballot to raise money for education. and the state Supreme Court kicked it off of the ballot. And had that been in 2018, months after Red for Ed, it would have passed. I don't think David Garcia would have won for governor, but I do believe we would have won the House or the Senate, the state House or Senate, because we'd have $12 million over the top talking about education. And they're not stupid. Ducey said, kick it off, let's put it on later, and let it come back later, and let's hold on to this House for 2 more years for me. The other thing I wanted to say, though, on choice is how great it is to live in a state where all of our leaders are women. Hobbs, Mays, mayors.
Yes, a round of applause. Yes.
When Dobbs' decision came down, Mayors Romero, Gallego, and their teams got at it and de-emphasized, said, oh, this is the lowest priority. Answering calls about abortion as the lowest priority in our city. Do not answer those calls. Please go and fight crime, or please go and keep us safe. So our women leaders stood up, and thank goodness I'm living in a state that has women leaders who can do that and will do that. And all of you lucky if you are as well. I think that's it. I would just say that they are, what we're going through right now, trying to figure out what our strategy is. We had a very clear vote yes to protect choice, and now it's not so clear. And now their 15-week ban seems a little more moderate and not so extreme. Which one would you take, nothing or in the middle? And so that's where we are. We're taking the middle. So I think they're also not stupid.
So I want to, so we're talking about how complicated the actual facts are, right? Yeah. I'm going to throw one more question, and then we'll go to the audience. But the question I want to ask you is, so we're dealing with actual facts that are already complicated, and then enter disinformation. And whether it is domestic or internationally driven, whether it is, a lot of money is going into disinformation, to deliberately confusing voters, to spreading lies. Many of them are misogynistic, they are racist, they are designed to sort of draw on our worst parts of our being, right, if you will, and make people feel afraid. How do you see disinformation playing a role here, and how do you think we combat it this year in Arizona, right? Because I love the themes here. We got to fight. We got to explain things, right? We got to call out the other side. But we're all talking about facts that are real. So let's talk about disinformation and make this a little even more complicated this morning. Anybody want to go first?
I'll start. So I struggle a little bit with the disinformation argument because a lot of times people think that if we amplify the voices that are pushing this to call them out, we're bringing attention to them. And I think that that's obviously true. But many times when people are thinking about this, they're forgetting that they have on their own already a massive ecosystem to spread their information. And so if we're being quiet about what they're doing, it's still happening, right? Like, it's just a weird thing. And there's obviously strategies about, making sure you talk about their tactics, their networks, their motivations, not just correcting their fact. You want to say, the reason they're doing this is because, and you hit one of those three. That's a thing. But I think more important is an ongoing effort to define these people in these issues well ahead of the election so that they are trying to unring bells. I think that's a really
So they're not
important
credible
thing.
messengers, is what you're saying, yeah.
And part of the challenge is that I no longer think, and this isn't just like because I'm a political consultant, that you wait to spend money in the end. I think that this stuff has to start happening early, way earlier, and there needs to be communications in an ongoing way to sort of like label and define these people. And we have the benefit of it being true, that they are extraordinarily extreme. And so we need to be out there doing that as much as we can.
Anna, how about you?
I mean, I would agree with what Tony said. I mean, going out early, getting your message straight and across, especially with the issue with abortion, arming, our stakeholders with that information so that they know that, abortion is healthcare, plain and simple. We'll start there. Start with the basic facts, arm people with, 3 or 4 messages that are consistent, that'll start, yesterday and go all the way to November 5th.
How about you?
Yeah, I will, I guess I'll say this, which is, and not to come right on the point about arm them with the facts, but if you give a voter a fact that disagrees with their value, they won't change their value because they've been given a fact. They're just going to ignore your fact is the bottom line, right? If we don't understand their value system in this conversation, which for me goes to Tony's point. I will just say, in terms of how to push back on disinformation, I don't know. The tactics about it, right? I mean, Tony's our Twitter master here, right, or our former Twitter ex-master here to sort of take advice from in terms of that regard. But if we give people facts, but we're not talking about their values, they're going to ignore our fact and they're going to hold on to their value. And so we tend to think as a New Deal in particular, not New Deal in particular, I mean like people, as you said, we're solutions oriented, et cetera. We have a 4-point plan to fix education, but under each of those 4 points, we have 10 subpoints. So really have a 40-point plan to fix education.
I can't think of anyone in this room with a 10-point plan that each has, maybe.
But then, but to Tony's point also, and then I'll get out of the way for questions, is his point about that we ran against horrible people, and that those people were not the extreme. Those people were the threshold for these folks. Now, this is your candidate. This is who you are. You disavow them or you are them. And so we want to highlight those extreme folks so that folks can see how much more moderate and better the other folks are. And there's a fight and there's a conversation going out there, and either we get involved in that conversation or not, but it's going to happen with or without us. Yeah. So we've got to get involved. We've got to get in the fight.
Let's go to audience questions. And I know we have some microphones and we've got some hands up. So let's start over here.
Thank you.
Just say who you are, too.
Rebecca Perkins Quokka, State Senator from New Hampshire. So this is super interesting, and I guess I have sort of 2 questions that are related. One is, Senator, do you talk about your opponents? Like, are you participating in any of this sort of defining them as extreme, or sort of what are the tools, that you're using to sort of maybe support this early strategy of putting them in this camp of MAGA or putting them in this camp of unreasonable, so that they have to quote unquote unring the bell? And then I guess, secondly, in talking about the issue of abortion, you're talking about the people behind these decisions, but it's less about the issue or sort of like the economic consequences of the issue or the freedom of women on the issue. So is that sort of the messaging you'd encourage us to shift to? Because up till now, the messaging has been very around like trusting women. So I'm just curious your reactions to those things.
So first question, for you, Anna, is really about, do you use those tactics around defining your opponents?
No, absolutely. I mean, right now, I'm in the position I'm in. I mean, I have 4 MAGA, that I sit on at the Arizona Corporation Commission. And so the issue that has been a high topic there was election fraud, where we had, the chairman of our Corporation Commission wanting to make that an issue. So we've had a good relationship, I would say, in the past 3.5 years. Where I needed to call him out on that issue, I did. And it was a matter of holding him accountable, of using state resources, state money, for sending out messaging for the election fraud as well, too. So, I mean, I would use that similar tactic in regards to abortion and those that are just very extremist on the issue. Right now on the issue of abortion, and meeting with constituency, for me, it's just like for me, abortion is health care, and I don't need anyone who is a judge, who is a politician, deciding when or if or how I have a family or start a family. And that seems to resonate really well with families in general. And I'm saying like, well, yeah, why is a politician or why is a Supreme Court justice deciding on what I can do with my body? So that seems to resonate very well. And then from there, pivoting and saying, at the legislature, here's who we have as the extreme MAGA representatives. But guess what? You have a choice to get rid of, these certain particular people and put them in with, number one, women who care about, giving you this freedom to choose. Also reminding Arizonans as well, too, there's 2 Supreme Court justices that are up on the ballot to be retained, and so we have the power to get them out of office. It's been done once in Arizona history, but I think with the momentum that is coming, if we organize correctly, that could potentially be another solution for people to say that, wow, I feel that I'm doing something, I feel productive, I'm voting for someone who cares about my family, I'm making decisions about this, and so they feel valued valued, they feel important, they feel part of the solution. So that's what I'm trying to do with everyone that I'm encountering, whether it's a town hall, whether I'm meeting with a group of stakeholders as well too.
Can I say something? Just a thing that happens a lot is a candidate will sit and strategize, how are we going to get this bad thing that my opponent is doing in the news? And so they come to a troublemaker like me, hoping that I will do it. And I have a knack for that. I'm able to sort of do that in Arizona. But one of the things I often tell candidates, and this is a thing that we did on the mayor's campaign and other campaigns, is the question is, how does it become news? If you say it as a candidate or an elected official, it's already news. I don't have to do all the other stuff. And so you have to weigh that. And I think a lot of times people have a fear that when they're fighting back that they will be viewed as not moderate. They'll be viewed, but then you pick the right things to fight back against because people do want a fighter. And I think you saw in the Biden administration, they figured this out pretty early on where they were like, we need to just attack. And some people were like, oh, I thought you were gonna bring the country together. But no, then it became news. And so I think that's a thing. I know it's really challenging to do that, especially if you have working relationships with the people that you are in the legislature or whatever with, but either this is important or it's not. And so you have to make that decision.
I'll be brief if I can, which is I really appreciate the question and I appreciate the point. I'm looking at, I'm from Kearns, Utah. I see my Salt Lake mayor. I see our former county mayor. Does MAGA conversations help in Salt Lake City? Well, the city maybe, the county probably not, and each of these, all of you are running in, you know your districts and you know your states and your counties way better than I know your districts and your states and your counties, and you're hearing a lot of MAGA up here, and and Arizona is not everywhere else, right? Arizona is its own special place. We were very red. We are purple. We are trending blue. We've been on our own journey, our own path, and all of your journeys and paths will be different. But I think my key point is whatever that defined contrast looks like is people do have choices, and you want to make that choice very, very clear to them. And it's not always a MAGA versus not MAGA choice. Sometimes it is. But the clarity that Biden's MAGA speech had at the end of last cycle, 2022, in terms of really telling people you do have a choice and these are your two choices, really helped Democrats in the elections across the country frame up that choice. And the choice that we're going to tell voters again this year, you have a choice. Yes, it's two almost 80-year-old white men, but there is a difference between these, and here's one choice and here's the other choice. You need to make it. And so I think it's just to really define that contrast, to Tony's points, fight and stand up on what that contrast looks like and be strong about it. To my point, they don't dislike us because we're liberal or progressive. They dislike us because they think we're weak. Don't be weak. But again, you all know your districts and your counties and your cities better than we do, and trust your instincts, but make that contrast as bright and as clear and as assertive as you can, because they are not going to hesitate defining us, right?
Thank you. That's great. Thank you. And go ahead, Mark. Yeah.
Hi, Mark Henson, overall New Deal fanboy. And so, therefore, playing to the crowd, I'd like to press a little bit further on the legislature. Want to give a little bit of context for everyone and then ask a two-part question. So to your point, the far right runs the Arizona Republican Party in the Arizona legislature, but barely. Right, so the state house margins here after the 2018 election, anti-Trump Democratic wave, the state house margin was 29-31. Then after 2020, such a close race, battleground state, the state's house margin was 29-31. Then in 2022, with the midterm and the choice, the state house margin was 29-31. So with that point, you have these very far right folks pushing these things in the legislature. So two-part question. One, what is the deal with that 30th seat? And then two, what are the reasons behind it? So Josh, I hear you of, it's not that they're, you're too liberal, you're too progressive. Is that you're weak? Is it a turnout mechanism? Is it a toxic national brand, especially if that, I don't know what the tipping point seat is here, but if it's an R+8, man, then you have to, in order to enact the amazing policies that you see in Minnesota, in Michigan, and get a trifecta, you do have to win statewide, but you have to have enough flexibility to get that R+8. And so the ongoing war, I'll conclude. I do love the sound of my own voice, but I'll conclude with, I always associate myself with Barney Frank. We're not perfect, but they're nuts. Is the ongoing push and pull between the progressive and the centrist wings of the party, is that hurting us in our legislative districts? So what's the deal with that 30th seat, and then why?
Who wants to go first? Yeah.
We only have one elected on the, well, I guess we have 2 electeds, but only
Go
one.
for it.
Yeah, I would, only one of us, 2 of us, I guess. But anyway, please, Anna, your experience in running for state legislative seats and winning in the state, and what is the problem with that 38th seat? What's going on?
What's up with that?
I'll say when I started in 2009, we had 9 Democrats in the House. We were called the Pizza Caucus because we literally could share a pizza. So since then, I mean, look where we've come so far, where we have, you know, a 1 vote margin in both the House and the Senate. For me, I would say it has always been a priority in making sure that we're winning competitive districts. And I think you're seeing that more often now. And you'll have some great races come, you know, this fall in regards to competitive races. You'll see there's, you know, a teacher that is running against someone who's worked in the Ducey administration in regards to that seat. And you'll hear a lot about that person right now in regards to the media, where they're holding him accountable in regards to issues that he's, you know, not told the truth on, and essentially holding his feet to the fire and taking that to the district and really galvanizing the community and saying, you have a choice here. Here's your choice. Do you want to stick with this person, or do you want to move in a different direction where someone will listen to you, value your opinion, and work with you and not against you? So we have those particular districts that I think in the past, weren't really targeted, but I would feel now more so because our, the amount of numbers have shrunk in regards to the margin of what we have in the House and the Senate. Firmly believe that we can, take one, if not both, this coming election as well too, because we have just amazing qualified candidates that are out there every single day delivering that message, hitting doors, and that is part of the job in regards, if you want to switch it, it's all about how many doors, how many people that you're speaking to day in and day out. I mean, when I ran, I had people say, if you come to my house one more time, like, I'm not going to vote for you. And I'm like, I'll come one more time, just in case you have a question. So yeah, I mean, they got to get to know you. They just, you don't want to assume people will know about you. I mean, you have to do everything possible to make that happen.
Candidates definitely matter. Anything to add to this question?
I would say that there's one sort of challenge that we have, which is that in the last 2 elections, many independents that typically vote Republican or Republicans, top of the ticket, voted Democrat, 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 Democrat. And when they got to the lower information races, it's a really tough thing to get them to continue to vote Democrat. And so that's a thing that we need to have in our mind. And I think one of the challenges in Arizona is that these state legislative races, they need to look a little bit more like a congressional race. And they need to be run with that type of money, that type of effort, with a person running the campaign who's thinking about that district, thinking about their candidate. But what ends up happening a lot, because just the nature of the races, is that we run kind of regional, kind of like softer type campaigns where they're using a message that's, we want better public schools. It's like, okay, all right, great, but like not being specific to something with their opponent or something that needs to be done in that district. And we need to do that. And then of course we need to just continue to have good candidate recruitment. And so, we need more personalized thinking about how to win an individual race and ongoing, adjustments as we go through.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a philosophy on this. Arizona districts are very unique in that they're nestled together, right? There's 29 legislative districts, and there's a state senator for each of those 29, but then there's 2 House folks in the same legislative district. And so the House districts are, by definition, therefore huge. The targeting is huge in terms of like figuring out, there's always this constant debate in our conversation around ledge races is, Do you send fewer pieces of mail to more people, or do you send more pieces of mail to fewer people in terms of what our spend can afford? And so, different philosophies within the committees themselves about, do we do single shot candidates and only try to get one Democrat out of there, or both, et cetera, and there's the dollar for dollar scenario there. But I'll just real quickly, in terms of the conversation of, I think if I heard the question correctly, is the left-right debates that Democrats, or the left, middle left, center left debates that Democrats have, do those harm us with swing voters or independent voters? And I think just as much as the MAGA Republican, not MAGA, or Trump Republican, not Trump Republican problem is harmful to Republicans, it can be harmful to us as well. But I would also say it's also what's energized some of the change in Arizona is our young people, our people of color, our folks who are willing to go and have conversations at doors. Their energy to have those kind of conversations, I think, is ramping up our energy to and getting folks elected. So there's some risk to that for sure, but I think in the end it's paid off for us, and that the folks who have stayed in this state and fought for that. We didn't change. Arizona didn't become purple because Californians moved here. It became purple because our people organized this state, and some of those conversations were progressive and some of those conversations were moderate. But without those conversations, we would still be the red state that we were a decade and a half ago.
Thank you so much. We have about time for one more question, I think, and there we go. We have it right here.
Yeah, Ashley from Iowa. Sorry, I'm losing my voice, but I have to be clear. I appreciate you hosting this conversation because my day job, I work in a high-risk OB clinic, so I often have many thoughts and feelings about what abortion actually is or isn't, even though we don't perform them there, but I'm not in a space where I get to speak as a nonpartisan elected official, as a council member in that space, or on behalf of my hospital, or even giving the impression of that. But the reality is it's a false conception that it's a choice. And so I feel like at this point, in the post-year of the Barbie, if you will, I'm really tired of us settling for scraps and for us settling for the fact that 15 weeks is okay. Most of the referrals in my office don't even come in until 16, 17 weeks. You're not even doing detailed exams until mid 17 weeks. And the fact is, most of us don't know that because we haven't had to go through that, thank God. I really fully believe that every birth honestly is a miracle for all these pieces to come together, but we're settling for scraps. And when I've heard so much about Phoenix and all the economic development, the economic risk of not investing in women and giving them what they actually need instead of what they're settling for is extremely detrimental to all of Arizona. So I guess my challenge back is, how do we stop settling for scraps? I mean, feminine products weren't even tested with real blood until a couple of years ago. And so, you can have all these commercials about erectile dysfunction, but we're not even talking about how a woman's body works, but we want to regulate the hell out of it. I just don't understand why we would settle for that and not come back absolutely swinging and start actually educating people about what it really is. Why do you have an abortion? What's the necessity of it? It's not a choice to die from sepsis. It's not a choice to decide that, well, I'll hope one twin makes it and maybe my body will erode itself and maybe I'll survive this pregnancy. That's not a choice. So I guess I want to hear from you about why we're still settling for even calling it a choice when it's not a choice. This is healthcare, but we have to actually break it down, and that's a big challenge to make that palatable for the everyday voter when they just generally don't understand how a woman's reproductive system works.
I would say that...
Thank you. That was amazing. Yes.
I would say that when it comes to settling for scraps, the sort of unified strategy is related to the ballot initiative, which is what I think similar to what happened in Ohio, which is not settling for scraps. It's going for an actual real deal thing. And there's a policy debate about what to do in the intervening months until that becomes law. But one thing that's important, I think, is that all of our statewide candidates in the last election, they ran on abortion rights. And they also aren't afraid of using the word abortion, because it's a silly thing, I think, to pretend that when you say pro-choice as a way to avoid the word abortion, that the person you're talking to doesn't know what you're talking about. I think a lot of times it just makes people think that you're being weak about this. It's one of those things where it's don't say the name of your opponent. I'm like, why? It's gonna be on the ballot. What a dumb thing to do. We do need to go out there and fight. And I think that the type of aggressive emotionally taxing messaging that is happening is because, like, we're going out there and trying to find women who are willing to tell the state the most heartbreaking story that they've ever had to, and just be attacked and criticized. And that's the kind of work that people have been doing in the state for a long time to get us to this point. And so, not to defend Arizona, but I promise you, they are on board with what you're talking about. And that's why the opposing campaign, the whole thing is, oh, it goes too far. You know, the bullshit about, like, executed on the birth table or whatever the hell. Like, that's their message. And they're fighting back hard. And there is a policy debate about what to do, whether or not over these next 7 months they're willing to take the 15-week ban or not. And that's the only place where it exists.
I will say, too, that we have fierce elected officials at the state legislature, at our municipalities. We had Mayor Kate Gallego last week go out, be a keynote speaker in regards to the press release that went out in regards to this decision. You had, Mayor Romero as well too, that led the effort in southern Arizona. I mean, we did that similar when we joined together in COVID and making sure that, our priorities, our directives for our community were heard loud and clear, and we weren't going to settle for a governor that wasn't going to give us the resources, or a president that, really didn't care about COVID and wanted you to inject yourself with chlorine at the time. So we have right now a Senator Eva Birch, who you may have probably seen a video of her explaining her abortion to her fellow colleagues, and you had her entire caucus standing behind her, beside her, encouraging her and thanking her for sharing her story. We have many courageous women that are sharing their story right now in regards to what has happened. When Vice President Harris came to Tucson, we had another brave individual share their story in regards to why she needed an abortion, and thankful that she was able to get one. Because it essentially saved her life. So I know that we will have that. Our leaders continue on this fight. Of course, as was mentioned, there is that dilemma right now in regards to what can happen at the state legislature and how quickly, the ban can be repealed. We'll see this coming Wednesday if it actually does come to fruition in the House. In the Senate, you'll take a little bit more time if it does pass, because in the Senate there's rules, so you have to hear a bill 3 days consecutively. And then at that point, you got to wait for sine die, and 90 days after that, the bill goes into effect if the governor signs it. Meanwhile, the governor has an executive order prohibiting those to be, prosecuted in regards to these issues, and developing plans to how do we work to be able to have women to have the resources to go to our neighboring states, in order to get the health care they need, and in order for them to get an abortion as well. We have, as mentioned, the AG that is, drew the line in the sand in regards to she will not be prosecuting. So I'm thankful for the women right now that we have in office, because I don't even want to think about what could have happened in the last election and where we would be today if we didn't have the fierce women leading us at the state level, at the municipality level as well too. So thank you for all the women here. Mayor Gallego. Lauren,
Josh,
thank
final
you.
word, anything from you? I will give you one last.
I've been the last person to speak about abortion, so thank you.
All right, there we go. Well, I will say this. We could do this for 2 hours, right, and hear more about Arizona, but let's give our panel a round of applause for giving us so much to think about, so many important words of advice and wisdom, and most of all, thank you to the three of you for the hard work you're doing, and everyone here in Arizona every day in such a complex environment. Thank you. It's wonderful. Next up, Ben, turning it to you.
Thank you, Emily. Good morning, everyone. Time to split for our final section of breakout sessions. These will run from 9:45 to 10:45. Please come back pretty promptly after those breakout sessions so that we can get started with our final panel on how cities and states are utilizing artificial intelligence.